You feel a hot zipper going down your leg. The pit of your stomach drops because you know you just screwed things up pretty good. You had a low-grade tear. There's not a giant hole and there isn't a ton of bruising. It still hurts like a and the muscle you tore feels like it can't do anything. But it's not as big of a deal as you think it is, and it shouldn't hold you back for much more than a week. So in this video, I'm going to give you guys the same framework that I use to get myself and my rehab clients back to normal in under a week after a strain. It doesn't matter if you're a lifter or if you play a real sport, this stuff works. And I do know what the dorks in the comments are already thinking.
I'm fake Dr. Seth. I'm supposed to be an injury expert, but I'm always getting hurt.
Dude, what the hell? Instead of acting like injury is the worst thing in the world, let's be good enough at rehab that it looks like injury never happened in the first place. And yeah, I did tweak a hammy on the weekend. I took a jump that I wasn't capable of on the day, I put more weight on the bar than I should have, and something broke. Fatigue can influence where that breaking point is. Technique can change how much load is shifted towards one structure or another, and I could talk about how both played a role, but the bottom line is that injury risk comes down to whether or not you did more than you were capable of handling. And if an athlete is pushing, they're going to cross that line at some point and injury will happen. And where the rehab industry gets it really wrong is they're so afraid of any pain or injury that they make it this big, scary, catastrophic thing. They don't recognize how resilient the human body is and how well we can bounce back. They treat a strain like it's a big deal, and because they treat it like it's a big deal, it becomes a bigger deal than it needs to be. And obviously, we don't want to get hurt. We want to minimize injury risk, but if we spend all of our time obsessing over trying to prevent injury, we're going to miss out on actual training. And if we develop a solid framework around rehab, we can bounce back so fast that injury stops being such a big, scary thing. So how did I go from having to lay down on the floor during Christmas dinner because my leg hurt so bad to being able to squat pain-free 3 days later? Step 1 is avoiding catastrophization, which is a big fancy word for tricking yourself into believing that whatever tweak you just had will ruin your training cycle and potentially your lifting career. You don't want to do that. Not catastrophizing is easier said than done because when your leg is a hot throbbing mess and you can't take a step without wanting to puke, things will seem pretty bleak. But when it comes to tears, having a lot of pain isn't really a bad sign, because when we're thinking about a tear, if it's a complete rupture, stuff is going to be completely ripped apart. It's gone. There's nothing left to be pulled on. But if it's only a partial tear, a lot of stuff is still there, and that stuff is going to be irritated. Every time you move, that stuff is getting pulled on, and it's going to tell you that it doesn't like it. It's going to hurt bad. This hamstring hurt way more than my complete pec rupture did. And when something hurts bad, it's normal to be a little freaked out. But if we let it really freak us out, we're going to make it feel worse. Pain results from our perception of threat, and if we catastrophize, that is us perceiving more threat. More threat equals more pain. More pain is going to mean a slower start to the rehab process and a harder time finding our way back. What we need to do is acknowledge the pain while not giving it more meaning than it needs to have. Yeah, it hurts. Yeah, we did tweak something, but we're not going to die. It doesn't mean that we're going to be out for 3 months. It doesn't mean that we need to pull out of the meet. And it doesn't mean that our competitive career is over. The reality is that until we start to rehab it effectively, we have no idea how meaningful an injury will be. And if you catastrophize, you're not allowing yourself the chance to see how small of a deal it could become. So now that we've wrapped our head around the fact that we're not totally screwed, now what? We're going to start the process of desensitization. That is, showing ourselves how not screwed we really are. We need to show ourselves that it's still safe to do at least something with that strained muscle. What that something is, and the start point will be biased on the severity of the tear. Remember, if it's a low-grade tear, some fibers will be damaged, but the rest are still going to be relatively intact. They're going to be irritated, but even if they don't like it, they're still going to be able to contract at least a little bit. To desensitize the muscle, we need to contract it repeatedly, light enough that we don't make it really hurt, but hard enough that we still can see some progress. Each time we contract that muscle without pissing it off, we are showing our nervous system and our subconscious that it is safe to use it. Pain results from the perception of threat, so if we can shift that perception towards safety, we're going to hurt less. And there are 2 ways that I like to do this. The first is using that muscle in isolation. Just use it to move the joint through as much range of motion as you can access without making it suck. As you complete reps, work to get a little bit more range and a little bit more squeeze. Once that feels okay, you can start to add a tiny bit of load and continue progressing as long as we don't start to make things feel worse. The second strategy is using the same movement that we strained the muscle in. To make this one work, we likely need to modify the movement. We might need to reduce range of motion or drop it down to body weight. We could even rig up a reverse band. But once you find a start point, all you need to do is gradually progress in range and load as things return to normal. With me and my hamstring, I started with a high bodyweight box squat and did a few sets of 20 reps until it started to feel kinda okay. I dropped the box down and repeated the process until I was able to squat to depth. It took me about 15 minutes to go from feeling like my leg was gonna fall off to handling slow but tolerable full range squats. It definitely wasn't comfortable, but it felt a hell of a lot better than it did right after the strain. We're going to use both of these strategies in conjunction for multiple rounds, multiple times a day, until using the thing starts to feel normal. The goal is absolutely not to push as hard as you can. The goal is to gently do a tiny bit more each time. Because if you push too hard, best case, you're going to make it feel worse, and worst case, you're going to cause more damage. So err on that side of caution, listen to how things feel. There's no need to rush, because if you do it right, you will surprise yourself with how quickly things will feel better. And as you're going through the desensitization process, you might notice that other muscles, joints, or movements might not be working quite like they should. This is normal. When we're in pain, our nervous system is going to try to protect us from creating more pain. And as a result, other muscles and ranges of motion are going to experience some degree of inhibition. So the next thing that we need to work on is re-establishing normal coordination. And people will try to make this way too complicated. Don't worry, it ain't. Most of the time, coordination is just going to come back on its own as we desensitize. But if a body part is being stubborn, we can give it some extra attention. With me and my hamstring, my left ass cheek did not want to contract worth a crap. So what did I do about it? First, I put myself in a position where I could force it to work. That meant holding a glute bridge and trying to contract as hard as I could. Once I could feel some stuff kind of happening, I moved to a single leg glute bridge to force myself to contract harder. It didn't feel great at first, but it at least felt like it was getting better. When those became okay, the bridge turned into some single leg hip thrusts. I progressed the thrusts into a single leg RDL where I did have to limit range of motion pretty heavily at first, but as the glute started working better and the hamstring continued to desensitize, I was able to do more and more. And I know somebody will want to say something about how I just did a bunch of glute activation drills, but the point people miss about activation is that it's just training the muscle. If we want a muscle to contract better, we need to find a way that we can contract it and then just contract it. It's going to work. So if you're struggling with inhibition, start with an isometric until you've established some connection. Up the intensity of that isometric so you can contract harder. Move on to something dynamic and then progress up from there. Similar to the desensitization stuff, we're going to want to push the coordination work as often as we can until things normalize. And now that things are feeling normal and moving normal, what's next? We need to rebuild tissue tolerance and strength. We're going to do that by easing our way into our normal training. Emphasis on two words, ease and normal. We don't want to dive into the exact same loading and volume that we did when we hurt the thing, but we do want to stay at least close to our normal exercise selection. Why we don't want to dive straight into normal loading should be pretty straightforward. If we push harder than we're capable of handling, there's a chance that we make things worse, and we don't want to risk creating more sensitivity or damage. Determining where you start will be a matter of listening to your body and erring on the side of caution. The goal of your first real session back will be to make it out feeling better than you did when you walked into the gym. So warm up well, start out light, take small jumps, and leave some in the tank. We don't need to push hard, we just need to push hard enough to push ourselves forward. For exercise selection, I want people to train as close to their usual movements as they can. Why? Because if we're able to manage loading within those movements, it will continue the desensitization process and it will help us build that tolerance specific to the movements we need tolerance in. The only time I'd recommend a big shift in exercise selection is if there's no way that an exercise can be scaled back. I normally train Nordic curls on Wednesdays, but with how the hamstring was, there's no way I was going to try a Nordic, so I just ran leg curls instead. And on a case-by-case basis, We might want to give the strained muscle a little bit more isolation attention depending on how things feel. That first session back, it will be scary, but we do need to start somewhere. And the sooner we can get started, the sooner we can be back. So get in there, do what you can handle, progress as it comes, and you'll be surprised how quickly you can get back to your normal training. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you know someone going through a strain, send this video their way. And if you're stuck, hit the links below to book an online appointment, and I'll be able to help you get your stuff sorted out. If you want to see how I use conjugate and concurrent principles to set up training to build lifters up to the point that injury becomes an afterthought, check out the next 6-week lecture intensive, The Blueprint to Resilience. It starts in March, and we're currently running an early bird sale, link below. And if you want an example of how I handled my own post-surgical rehab process, check out this video over here.